One of the biggest challenges that middle and high school math teachers have is trying to figure out how to help your students to be successful with that grade level or course level content when they have gaps from previous grade levels. You only have so much time in a year, in a semester, in a week, in your class period, and you have to make the most of it. So, we all know you cannot spend large chunks of time teaching below grade level content. And so that means that you need to find ways to continue moving forward with the lessons from your curriculum that are aligned to those grade level standards and your course level goals while meeting your students where they are. So, today I'm going to share four different types of adjustments that you can make to your daily lessons in order to meet your students where they are and without lowering the bar or lowering your expectations or dumbing it down. Now, I love to cook and I love to bake, but oftentimes I find myself adjusting recipes in order to meet the needs or the preferences of different family members. And so I'm going to use that as an analogy throughout today's training. At times, it has been a challenge trying to feed my family of four when we don't all like the same things. Some examples: Dan and I like a little spice, and the kids do not. Livy will not tolerate onions in her food, and Otto hates all forms of chicken. Nevertheless, my goal is always to create healthy, balanced meals that every family member will eat without making two, three, or four different meals. It does take some creativity, but most nights I am able to make one meal with some adjustments. Keep the menu the same with the same ingredients and the same main dish, but differentiate and make some tweaks and adjustments in order to make it work for everybody. The exact same principle holds true when we're adapting lessons to meet our students' needs. It's important to differentiate. However, we always want to do so in ways that maintain the integrity of the lesson and don't compromise students' learning and their long term success. So, I'm going to share four approaches that work both when you're cooking and when you're looking to adapt a math lesson to accommodate your students' needs. So, let's go through an example for each one. First up is substitute. Now, when you're cooking, you might decide to substitute ingredients. For example, you might swap out chocolate chips for raisins in cookies. In a risotto, you may put chicken instead of mushrooms if you hate mushrooms like I do. Look at an example from the Illustrative Mathematics curriculum, grade 7, unit 4, lesson 6. 6.2, more cereal and a discounted shirt. The first problem contains a decimal, 18.5. One option is to substitute 18.5 for a whole number that will be easier for students to find 20% of, something like 15 or 20. Now, I'll talk a little bit later in the video about how to know if the substitutions you're making are actually compromising the learning goal of the lesson. But for now, let's talk about strategy number two, which is to omit. When we're cooking, we can omit certain ingredients. For example, eliminate the nuts in a brownie recipe or a cookie recipe. Perhaps you're at a pizzeria and there's a specialty pizza and it sounds delicious, except for one ingredient that you really don't like, and you ask them just to leave that ingredient off. Let's look at an example from the IM curriculum, grade 8, unit 4, lesson 15. This lesson has four main activities. Now, when I was planning this lesson with a teacher, we felt like students would need more time for each of these activities. And so we decided to eliminate one of them in order to create that space and a little bit more of a buffer for the other activities. We made sure to read the learning goals very carefully and make sure that we really understood what was the goal of this lesson, what was the main point of this lesson, in order to decide which activities were the most essential to keep and which activity was more of a nice to have. So 15.1 was really squarely on the nose with one of the learning goals. It was for students to be able to categorize different types of systems. Similarly, 15.2 was really spot on because the second learning goal, it was for students to be able to create their own system of equations. And this activity clearly gave them that opportunity. In this specific instance, we didn't feel like this was the most essential activity in order to meet these learning goals. Given what he knows about where students' understanding is right now, currently in the unit, he felt like this activity would take so much scaffolding and so much time that by doing that, it might actually compromise their learning. And then 15.4, solving systems practice, is just another opportunity for students to really work towards mastery of one of the main purposes of the entire unit, which is to solve systems. All right, number three, adding something. When you're cooking, you might add ingredients or time. For example, add M&Ms to your cookie recipe. Add some crushed red pepper flakes to pasta. Oftentimes, when I'm baking, I add some additional time, whether it's muffins or bagels or pizza. I set the timer for what the recipe calls for, and then I turn the oven light on and gauge. Has it had enough time, or do we need a few more minutes? Applying this to your lessons, you may find that students need more time, especially if you're working with students with a lot of unfinished learning or students who are English language learners. You may need to add some additional scaffolds, which inevitably will add time. And you'll see that these adjustments go hand in hand because if you are spending more time on one task or one activity because you are previewing vocabulary, because you're showing an image of something in order to build background knowledge, because you are revisiting a concept from a prior grade level, you're going to need more time. Here's an example of a scaffold that I provided to my daughter. Initially, when she added these two decimals together, she thought that 3.1 plus zero point 0.60 was 3.61. And I realized this was because she didn't understand what the value of the digit in the tens place was. And so I added a place value chart. And with that support, she was able to understand why the sum was 3 and 7 tenths instead of 3 and 61 hundredths. All right, let's move on to the fourth category, which is reduce. Sometimes when I'm cooking, I reduce the amount. Rather than eliminating it altogether, I just use less. There's a ginger snap cookie recipe that I love, but my kids don't really love the flavor of cloves, so I cut that way down. So, for example, in this IM lesson, which is from grade 7, Unit 5, Lesson 1, you could decide to reduce the number of problems that you include in a certain activity. In activity 1.3, seagulls soar, sharks swim, there are 5 different questions within this activity. Now, in this case, we're not eliminating this activity. We're still going to do the activity, but we might decide to reduce the number of questions in order to have more time to have more in-depth conversation about a few of them. If you look closely at this problem, numbers 2, 3, and 4 all have 3 parts to them. 2 and 3 in particular are very, very similar. So you could narrow in on just a few of these and still have ample opportunities to help students advance their understanding towards the learning goals, which you can see here. Okay, so quick summary. 4 strategies you can use to adjust your lessons. They are substitute, omit, add, and reduce. But as you're adapting and adjusting lessons, there's one essential thing I want you to keep in mind, which is that you don't want to change it in a way that changes its essence at the core. For example, if I reheat frozen chicken nuggets for my kids, that is not the same as slow cooking a rich chicken tikka masala. They both have chicken in them, but other than that, they are nothing alike. So let's go through 2 safeguards you can use to ensure that you're keeping the integrity of the lesson intact as you make changes, as you differentiate, adjust, and adapt to meet your students where they are. Number 1 is do not change the learning goal. Make sure that the way you've restructured the lesson will support students in reaching that lesson goal, that daily objective. Okay, so in a lesson, here's what changing the learning goal might look like. Replacing a rich math task with a worksheet of practice problems. That's like going from chicken tikka masala to chicken nuggets. Giving students work from a lower grade level on a similar topic. Making these types of changes is a red flag because when you're changing the problem students are doing, you're completely changing the lesson. And when you completely change the lesson, I guarantee you're changing the learning goal. This is not to say that you'll never incorporate practice problems or touch on work from previous grade levels. However, understand that when you're doing that, you are changing the learning goal. All right, safeguard number 2, do not change the aspect of rigor. As a reminder, there are 3 different aspects of rigor, and all 3 are essential for students to be proficient in math. Students need to have conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and the ability to problem solve and apply their knowledge. These are meant to be balanced over time. However, that said, many lessons and units lean heavier on 1 or 2 of these at a time. It really depends on what the content is that is the goal. So it's important for you to identify which aspects of rigor are primarily in play in a lesson, and then ensure that you don't change that or compromise it in the way that you adjust the lesson. Here's what it might look like to change the aspect of rigor. Walking students through the problem, guiding them through it, or modeling it at the board instead of allowing them to problem solve on their own. That's taking something that was meant to be in the application bucket and changing it to a procedure. A second example is pre-teaching students a concept that they are meant to discover on their own by exploring within a lesson. For example, maybe students are meant to discover what the Pythagorean theorem is, or what it means to solve a system of equations, or how many degrees there are in a triangle, which all support them in building their conceptual understanding. But if you pre-teach the content to them, if you pre-teach this concept by defining the term, by giving them notes ahead of time, or telling them what they're going to discover, you're really undermining the whole purpose for the activity. And you're taking away their opportunity to do that critical thinking and to connect those dots on their own, which really leads to deep understanding in math. It's kind of like sharing the punchline before you've even told the joke. This second one can really sneak up on you because at first glance, the work that students have in front of them looks the same. It's the same problem, it's the same task, it's the same worksheet, but the way they're engaging with it, the amount of thinking they're doing, the type of thinking they're doing is not the same. I liken this to replacing my favorite thin crust pizza with a cauliflower crust. I'm sorry, but in my opinion, a chewy crust is an essential part of the pizza experience. A cauliflower pizza might look like a pizza and smell like a pizza, but it doesn't crunch like a pizza. So be careful. Make sure that when you're adjusting your lessons, you're not changing it so much that one of the essential ingredients or characteristics is taken away. And again, there are 2 essential ingredients in every lesson that you do not want to change. Number 1 is the learning goal. And number 2 is the aspect or aspects of rigor. In this video, we went through 4 ways that you can adjust your math lessons to help students access the content while keeping your expectations high, giving students the opportunity to engage with grade level or course level content, and maintaining the learning goal for the lesson. We talked about these 4 adjustment types: substitute, omit, add, and reduce. Here's an easy way to remember these. The first letter of each one spells the word soar. Soar means to fly or rise high in the air, which is perfect because you can implement these adjustments to help your students soar. For more information, resources, and support on this topic, you can check out my website, mindfulmathcoach.com. If you don't have it already, you're going to want to check out my free resource bundle to help you increase access to grade level math. Find that at mindfulmathcoach.com/bundle.